Okay, so Clarke Carlisle. I could start on many different levels in terms of the first question, but I'm going to dive straight in there with you were very good at school, very good with your academics, became a footballer, but what do you think you would have become if you hadn't been a footballer?
I think a T-Rex.
You know what? Of all the questions, of all the answers I expected you to say, that was actually one. I remember playing against you. Actually, it's not a bad point because I remember when you were at QPR, I played against you, and Ian Dowie was there, and he knew of you well. Obviously, his QPR days, and I remember you were a bit of a man mountain, like you did have a bit of a T-Rex going on there, like.
I
But
was
yeah,
very aggressive, mate. I was very Neanderthal in my playing style. If it
right.
moves, kick it. If it doesn't, kick it till it does. If I hadn't have been a footballer, I had dreams as a kid of being either a teacher or a lawyer.
Oh.
And law really piqued my interest as a kid. And I retained that, for quite a while when I was playing. And when I had my injury at 20, I went back to college to do A levels. I did politics and law and maths, but I just started them, and then I got fit. And then, as is kind of like that, almost egotistical, pervasive football mindset as a young man, I just absolutely ditched my A levels and ran straight back to football.
Yeah, interesting. So when you were thinking about that kind of, I suppose, trajectory, did you have was there anybody that you looked up to, or like a mentor, or could be something you knew or didn't know that wasn't, like, say, like a lawyer or somebody in that professional sphere? Did you have any mentors or anything growing up then, or was it just? I'm interested to know where that came from, that kind of instinct to certainly for law.
Hmm, that's a really good question. I don't think I did have any role models. The only things I can think of were TV shows that I used to watch as a kid. TV when I was a kid isn't like now. We didn't have 300 channels, that we had 4 channels, and Dad had the remote. So you watch what Dad watched. There were 1 or 2 programs that really stuck in my mind. And what am I going to say? They stuck in my mind so much, Dave, that I can't even recall them right now.
To be honest, I just thought you're trying your best to segue into Saved by the Bell. Yeah, because of my nickname is Screech. But anyway, I know what you're trying there. I know what you're trying. Yeah, because that's interesting. Because when I thought, but I used to want to be a vet, right?
Okay.
And then when somebody hands you the option to become a footballer, it's an interesting one, naturally, for any young lad. And so, in terms of, wasn't anything that springs to mind in that level? Do you think you just had natural instincts for pursuing like more professional kind of not academic career, but like something like law? Do you think? Can you think back to any kind of situations you might have been in that would have triggered that kind of thing as a kid?
I had a natural aptitude for academia, yes.
Yeah.
But more than that, I had an application that was instilled in me by my father, well, by my parents. One of the complicating factors in my growing up, and it's the same for a lot of guys of mixed heritage my age, is we were kind of like the first generation of many mixed heritage people in England.
Yeah.
I had a black father and a white mother growing up in the 70s. And my dad, he was intelligent, he was hardworking, he was earnest, yet he could never get a job. And that
Mm,
was just because he was a 6'5" black man living in the north of England
yeah.
in the 70s and 80s. But added on top of that, he had a life of daily conflict
Mm,
because he had to be prepared to fight people to walk down the street with my mum, So in that dynamic, what we saw around Preston was that there were a lot of families where you retaliated with
mm,
conflict, or you played that long-term strategy. And that's what my dad did. He took us out of the inner city of Preston, Leyland, which is almost a suburb, and he instilled in us that if you want to succeed in this world, you are going to have to be the best. And I
mm.
don't just mean slightly better than everyone else. You are going to have to absolutely stand out in order to achieve, because that was his lived experience. He
Mm.
could have been the best candidate, but he never even got an interview. So it amazes me, actually, Dad. I'm so proud of my parents, that even though it was the total opposite of his lived experience, he instilled in me and my siblings, look, if you work hard, if you give everything you've got, if you apply yourself, you can achieve anything.
Yeah.
You know, that comes from a person who wants to break the cycle.
Yeah,
You know, that comes from a person who doesn't want to impose their own lived barriers and obstacles on their children and
yeah.
create a generational, you know, succession of mindset that the world is against me. And I'm so grateful to my dad for that, because what it did is it made me apply myself in everything that I did. No
Mm-hmm,
matter what sport, no matter what subject, no matter if I was just, you know, messing around with my mates, I gave
mm-hmm,
it 100% every time. Now, there's a consequence to that approach. And the consequence to that approach, it kind of runs off the back of my dad's own coping strategies with his difficulties.
mm-hmm,
So because he couldn't get a job, because you know he couldn't fulfill his identity as provider for the family, which was a core identity of his, he dealt with that the way a lot of Caribbean men did and still do. He
mm-hmm,
locked himself in his room and smoked weed.
mm-hmm,
So for huge tranches of my childhood, we didn't really see dad for quality time. He was upstairs in his man cave. And he
mm-hmm,
only ever came out to either discipline us or to congratulate us.
mm-hmm,
So what that meant to me as a young boy was that I associated success with love and affirmation from my dad.
mm-hmm,
And that was my driving force. I wanted to be the best, and I wanted it because I thought that love and affection was conditional.
mm-hmm.
So it worked for me, Dave. It worked because, you know, straight A student and
Yeah.
like yourself, got the opportunity to play football.
Mm-hmm,
And another consequence was that I developed a really dysfunctional understanding of love and affection and relationships. And it's not until I got to like 37 years of age that I addressed that.
yeah. So I can see how you, as a young lad, you can take like various different cues from your dad in that sense. And would you say that the certainly the you know that 100%, 110% work ethic, you feel like not only at say at school in your education, but also in sport, that I suppose I can believe that married quite well with certainly football, the ethic of, you know, work hard, work harder, and work harder again. Do you think that without that kind of experience, I suppose, of racism and your dad giving you some cues along the way, do you think you would have been the footballer you became?
It fed into my success in football directly and indirectly, 100%. Not
Yeah,
only in that application dynamic. I mean, you and I know the industry. Anyone who's been in the industry knows.
yeah,
You would, as a manager, as a chairman, as a fan, you would rather have someone on the pitch who you know is going to give every ounce of energy that they've got
yeah,
than that person who's incredibly talented but just flips in and out of games and tries, you know, every now and
yeah,
again. That work ethic, especially in English football, it is revered.
yeah,
And because managers knew they would get that from me, even if the quality might not have matched up to the application, they
yeah.
knew what they were going to get, and that worked. The dysfunctional aspect worked as well, Dave.
Mm,
Because when you get into a football club, I didn't go in there strong, knowledgeable about who I was and this is what I represent. I
mm-hmm,
went in there molding myself to the environment because I needed to fit in with the group so that I got that acceptance. I didn't do whatever I wanted to do. I did whatever the manager wanted me to do because his opinion mattered.
mm-hmm,
Oh, if fans had an opinion, I would engage with them and try and win them over because their opinions mattered. That kind of social chameleon, you know, aspect of my own personality and identity, it really worked well in football because football is all about external validation. You and I both know, especially as defenders, that when you come off the pitch, you could have had the best game of your life, but if the team loses 3-0, you're getting a 4 out of 10 in the paper.
yeah,
But you know you played well, you
yeah.
know? So it's like personal opinion of performance and of who you are is irrelevant in football. All that matters is what other people think.
Yeah, it's a very good point actually, Clark, because I hadn't thought about this before, but as you're saying, I remember that. I remember, you know, I was like your solid seven all the time,
Mhm.
but even when I occasionally played a nine and we got beat, like you say, you'd get a four. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we didn't have social media back then.
Yes.
And
Oh,
we
wow.
didn't, and I know, Matt, can you imagine? And I actually can't imagine today, in the last decade, I can't imagine what it would be like being a player in terms of having social media, needing that acceptance, seeking it from the wrong avenues, if you like. But I distinctly, I remember even being with lads that got a bad review in a newspaper, and I'm thinking, but this journalist, they haven't even been a footballer. What is their how what script are they going off here in order to be able to say how well somebody's played a game? But what do you think you'd been like if social media had been around then, and also the teams you around and the players? How do you think you would have coped with it back then? It was like it
That,
is today.
it's a brilliant question, David. And just to kind of add weight to what you were just saying in that, I mean, my best performance in the Premier League was away at Anfield. Absolutely old man Fernando Torres. And I mean, I kicked him all over the place. So much so, after the game, he asked for my shirt and I was buzzing. We got beat 4-0. Yossi Benayoun got a hat trick. And in the paper, I got a 3 out of 10. Yeah,
Um,
I know that was my single best Premier League performance in my career. You
mm,
know, and it's incredible, but how that uh, uh, it's pre-social media. That
mhm,
journalist was so important. They were
mhm,
so important because the clubs that I played at, you've got 15, 20,000 people who came to the game. Yeah,
mhm,
if that one person says that I've got a 4 out of 10 and they put that in the paper,
mhm,
60 million people are going to see that tomorrow and
mhm,
they're going to think that I was rubbish.
mhm,
They weren't even at the game. And the impact of that is that when I then go out on the Sunday with my family for Sunday dinner and we're smiling and laughing, and I had this at Leeds a couple of times, people would come to the table and say, "Look at you, you don't even care. Look at
mhm,
you laughing and smiling. You were shy yesterday."
mhm. Yeah.
And that's how not only pervasive but intrusive
Mhm,
football was in our generation, and that's why that journalist 4 out of 10 mattered so much because
mhm.
it dictated life interactions until the next match.
Yeah.
Nowadays, and like I got the kind of crossover. I think you and I have got a foot in both camps because I was on Twitter when it first came out, and I remember MySpace coming out, and then Twitter and Facebook and stuff. And we were just working out the engagement. But now it's set.
Yeah.
Now social media is set, it entrenched in societal interaction.
Mhm,
And the difference between that now, that one journalist and social media, is that you don't have sanctuary anymore
mhm,
because social media interactions are on your phone, in your face, wherever you are.
mhm,
So I had to go out for Sunday dinner to get some interaction and feel that pervasive control of football. Whereas players nowadays, they try and come home, they try and retreat into their sanctuary, but they're sat there with their family in the front room, sat in their bedrooms, and they've got literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people interjecting and
mhm,
injecting their own opinions on their performance. And as we sadly see nowadays, it
mhm,
always crosses over into that personal judgment.
mhm,
So the type of person that I was when I was playing football, that people pleaser, that person whose self-esteem was anchored in external validation,
yeah.
that would have destroyed me.
Mhm,
It would have mentally destroyed me. I say mentally quite specifically because physical application was never an issue.
mhm,
So if someone told me that I was rubbish, I would ruminate and I would go on and I'd castigate myself and all the rest of it. In my mind, I'd try and win them over. And that would fuel my training the next day.
mhm. Yeah.
So it might have made me apply myself more physically
Mhm,
if I'd have been entrenched in a social media society. Might have done. What I do know is, especially with the way that my mind used to work,
mhm.
psychologically I'd have been destroyed. And I think that would have impacted my football more because of the way that I used to deal with it.
Do you know when you talk about, like, I suppose, to get that respite from, we had ways to get away from it, right? Because we
Mm.
weren't literally clinging to a phone. Um, but do you know, like when you physically work yourself and then then you will rest your body, right?
Yeah.
Mentally, I suppose we had an opportunity. Obviously, wouldn't always take it, but we had a better opportunity, I suppose, to be mentally stressed in terms of, the game and everything surrounding the game. And then we had the ability to not, well, we didn't have a phone and social media as it is today. So we had we had more opportunity, more places to go and be away from a phone that, you could switch off. Do you, when you think back to playing, even though there wasn't social media, what was your kind of most, like, I suppose, common go-to place or person or situation that helped you get more mental ease?
Very interesting question. Multifaceted, nuanced question.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a good enough understanding of being able to switch my mind off in
Yeah.
order to apply it intentionally. So what I found was that I attached myself to distraction things.
Mm-hmm.
So computer games distracted me, fruit machines distracted me, drinking distracted me. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than actually applying my off time as if only I knew then what I know now, if I understood that I needed time to be, needed time to rest and reflect and reset, my mental and psychological state, there was more than adequate opportunity for me to do that. But I didn't have the basic knowledge, David. If you don't know, you
Yeah.
don't know.
Do you think?
So, I didn't understand that there was something that needed doing.
Yeah. Do you think the clubs knew back then? I mean, I know in certain ways you could look at it as the knowledge maybe wasn't as freely available back then, or the training for managers, coaches, clubs. But what do you
You said back then, look, this wasn't the glorious 50s, mate. It was only 10 years ago.
True, but the way I look at it is, I think back to, like, also there was a guy called John Harben who came in at Oldham Athletic in particular, and he was big on the psychological side of the game and the mental side of the game. And I remember what we would now call like an exercise in mindfulness, for example. I remember doing that at Boundary Park with the Sheridan brothers, John and Sheridan, who were just like, they didn't really adopt it because they just thought it was absolute nonsense. And I was
Yeah.
quite a young, impressionable player. I'd just come signed from Newcastle. I wanted more first team games. I wanted to be accepted by them too, in particular. They were leaders. I looked up to them. And it skewed my mind a little bit because the culture around football at that time, for me personally, was, oh, you just got to kind of suck it up. You've got to, you get on with stuff. What's this nonsense? You're just closing your eyes and hearing somebody talk nonsense and stuff like this. But actually, as John Harben came in and Ian Dowie really adopted that, and that actually, when I look back, was it was definitely the first time that I started to think about football properly, both mentally and physically. And for me, I don't remember. I mean, in Newcastle there wasn't really that, but I noticed the change between, like you say, Keegan Dalglish. Then when Ruud Huller came in, it was different. There's a slight bit of hint of that. But can you think about any of the clubs you were at? Was that it was kind of like, not necessarily ahead of the game, but I'd say certainly there was clubs that I remember that were a bit more ahead of the game in terms of the mental side of sport and in football in particular. Was there any people or standout people or clubs or any initiatives that were done when you played?
Definitely, yeah. One immediately springs to mind, and it was probably the only one. At Watford with Adi Boothroyd, and that would have been 2005 through to 2007. He brought in an incredible man called Keith Mincher.
Mm-hmm.
And Keith, he did something very similar to what you were describing. We would have sessions where we was just trying to get us to learn how to be.
Yeah.
Just sit, relax. It's like, can you hear that? Can you connect with that? Can you think of a memory? And we did it because that squad that we had at Watford, we really bought into what AD was trying to do. Even if people didn't agree with it, they
Mm-hmm.
did it.
Yeah.
That they applied themselves in the sessions, and it worked incredibly well. I mean, we were a bunch of absolute ragamuffins, and we got to the Premier League. It was outstanding. And Keith Mincher is a wonderful, wonderful man. And I would say probably the first example in my playing career of a non-sporting psychological approach. The thing is about that is because it was so alien to the current MO, we didn't take it away from the context.
Right.
or I didn't at least, and thinking back to the players that are around and the successes of some of them, maybe one or two of them did, people like Ashley Young, he's gone on and had an absolutely phenomenal career. But yeah, I did the sessions when we were with Keith, but it kind of wasn't impressed on me enough that it was something for me to take away with myself and do at home and explore further and find out how best it works for me. So yeah, Keith Mincher and Adi Boothroyd at Watford were the first example of what I would say is mindset, coaching and understanding how to relax and meditate and be. All other clubs were deluding themselves because they were bringing in sports psychologists.
Right.
And they thought that getting guys in their optimal performance state was all the psychological work that was necessary for them.
Yeah.
When actually getting in your OPS is it's fundamentally necessary to be an elite athlete. You need to know it. You need to be able to get in there. Blinkered, focused. No fear, winning at all costs. However, when you use that approach in daily life, it's destructive. It's self-destructive, and it destroys relationships because you're holding an impossible standard to a human interaction.
Yeah.
Without any kind of explanation or education around the distinction between the two, players get trapped in what we call, that football mentality.
Yeah.
That footballer's mentality, and that's very much perfection, obsessive compulsive, and we wonder why footballers can't make a transition from that professional life into, civic street, for want of a better term.
And do you think the context of, say, for example, being around a lot of men and say a masculine environment in many cases, do you think that has a part to play in terms of, traditionally speaking, and especially my experience within sport, is I didn't hear many vulnerable conversations between men in the dressing room, outside the dressing room. It was almost seen as a little bit of a weakness in my experience. How much of a factor do you think it plays in terms of just saying society, basically in terms of men, mental health and being open and vulnerable? Do you think that was also a factor?
It's definitely a factor in my career and coming through the time that I did. And it's standard procedure. People think that look at you're going to work with 40 of your friends. And we are, some of us are good friends, some of us are colleagues. What people don't seem to understand or grasp is that there are 40 guys there, but only 11 can start on a Saturday and only one in your position. So yeah, we are friends and colleagues, but we're actually our first competitors. So when you get into a training ground on a daily basis, you don't want to show any kind of vulnerability or weakness. That's why guys hide a little tight calf or that they don't want to go and see the physio because they don't want to show the manager or any of these other squad mates that there's any weakness to be exposed. It's exactly the same psychologically. That you don't want to say, "Oh, I'm struggling with this," or "I'm feeling really stressed at that," or "I'm getting pre-match nerves." You're not going to say that because these people who are your teammates are actually the first ones who are going to try and expose that because they want to get in the side. And also, the manager doesn't want to see that because he's like, "Can I rely on this person?" Because they've been honest about their vulnerability. So that being said, that happened massively and still does. But it was more prevalent in my generation and before. What I'm seeing nowadays, especially the generation coming through. In fact, David, I'm going to go so far as to say that the problem is in my generation. The older generation, that they are of an older generation. They've come through wars. Their parents have come through wars. There's a very specific mindset about masculinity, about identity, about, struggle, problem management, crisis management, very entrenched. And then you come to our generation who've had it pretty easy, really, by comparison. But we've still got a lot of that, as we taught, generational conditioning about core values, identity, what it is to be a man, masculinity, what traditional relationships look like. So they were fed into us. And then we've kind of segued over this over this bridge into a new way of thinking. So we've got one foot there, historical, but we have an appetite to embrace the new. And that's why our generation has conflict. Whereas the
Yeah.
younger generation coming through, and our children are 25, 16, 14, 6 and 4. So I'm seeing this. Their openness, their understanding, their appetite to share and communicate, and their knowledge of the value of self and what they are, what they should expect from interactions. It's in a totally different stratosphere to us, and definitely those who've gone before us. So my insight on this is that the future is actually very bright. It's
Yeah.
us who are in those influential positions now, who are in conflict because we've been taught one way and now we're trying to act
Yeah.
another. And how can we do
Yeah.
that authentically? We're trying to teach a generation who knows more than us in this regard.
Yes.
So
That's
there's no wonder there's an abrasion with authority and with understanding and with application when it comes from our generation to the next. Because we're betwixt and
yeah.
between, whereas they're living and breathing it as their, you know.
If we take on that point you're saying, and fast forward it to say today, and I'd say in recent years, what have you been doing professionally yourself after football that's in that kind of same sphere, in terms of like helping other people, helping other generations, in terms of the work you do? And I know you've also done stuff with the PFA as well. You've done stuff on racism, but also tell me a bit more about what you're doing today, because it does reflect. It's very interesting to hear you talk, and I know what you do today. But if you could just elaborate a bit more about, like, what you're up to today in terms of professionally, because it does link perfectly with what you've just said.
Well, today I'm Chief Operating Officer of It's Mental, an organisation that is trying to shift. Society needs a paradigm shift in thinking about wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Our generation and ones before have always been steeped in the I'm not going to say process. If something's wrong, then we might react to it. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
approach that we take to our wellness. It's always crisis management, it's always disaster recovery. Well, taking that
Mm-hmm.
approach means that there's always something to fix before we can go on and be the best version that we can be. And we need to totally turn that on its head. So it's
Mm-hmm.
mental. Our focus is
Mm-hmm.
on preventative measures about well-being and wellness,
Mm-hmm.
providing not only the education and information, but the resources that are demographically specific in order to help you with that. That
Mm-hmm.
we say it's good to talk. It's like, oh yeah, what's going on for you? What's happening? What's wrong? Blah blah blah. It's good to talk, and it's good to know, what's going on in someone's life. Asking the question at that point is two
Mm-hmm.
steps too late. If
Mm-hmm.
we can ask people, why are you well? Not why are you
Mm-hmm.
unwell? Why are
Mm-hmm.
you well today? Because when
Mm-hmm.
we understand why we're well, that's when we can consciously refine it and
Mm-hmm.
consciously evolve it so that when life happens, things like, oh, I don't know, a pandemic, when a
Mm-hmm.
pandemic happens and you can't go to the gym anymore, or you can't play golf, or you can't, go to your reading club at the local, when your thing is taken away, if you
Mm-hmm.
have a conscious understanding of what it is that you get from that, it's going to make a more seamless link into you finding other secondary and tertiary support structures. So
Yeah.
understanding what it is that makes us well is far
Mm-hmm.
more important than knowing what makes us unwell.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, in terms of the pandemic, and I suppose the rise of technology and social media still, and TikTok particularly at the time, I could see that was almost the perfect storm in some ways. People being literally locked down with a phone.
Yeah,
And it's such a good question that you've mentioned there. Why are you well? It's focusing on the positive, isn't it? It's and like you say, I think certainly for me, it's quite often when you look at social media, and even if you're not, somebody isn't like judging what you're doing or liking or not liking something, even I still sometimes can look at somebody else and compare myself, and there's a
yeah,
lack of some. There's like a lack overlap. I need to be better. I need to be more intelligent. I need to be, I need to have more knowledge. And it is one of them things. when I tend to find I'm at my best when I am focusing on what's going well, and also just the acceptance of, I'm alive today, I'm happy, I'm healthy. A lot of people aren't, and I think for me, the pandemic had, it had a lot, it put people under a lot of pressure. How did you feel yourself personally through the pandemic?
Very good question. The pandemic, it brought a speed of evolution and change in myself
Yeah.
that wouldn't have happened without it, not at that pace. I'd have been far slower. A lot of things were kind of brought to a very immediate head where they warranted attention.
Hmm.
With my wife Carrie, we just had our second child, which was my fifth. We got a blended family, and we moved over to Newcastle and moved in with my mother-in-law with the intention of knocking her house down and building our family home. Wonderful
Hmm.
dream. And then we moved there day one of lockdown one. A two-bed bungalow in Ponteland. And we were a family of four living in my mother-in-law's spare bedroom.
Hmm.
And my mother-in-law worked nights and she was a key worker for the police.
Hmm.
So we had to keep the kids quiet at night. Our 3-year-old had just been diagnosed severely autistic. She was non-verbal, which meant that a lot of her communication was all in screams and dysregulation and really quite guttural sounds that cut to the core of you as a parent. It was a ridiculously difficult time.
Mm.
2 years we were in there, and 2 years where you have to ask for a biscuit at 40 years of age. Like, "Mum, can I have a biscuit, please?" And it was just such a weird dynamic. We couldn't see my other children for vast periods of time. And in all of that, just what we were talking about, social media and socials and technology became entrenched in everybody's life.
Yeah.
There was no longer a generational divide. It didn't matter if you were 99 or 9. You needed technology to connect with other human beings. So
Yeah.
all of that push and that forced kind of change came at the one time. And I'm so blessed, that I have the incredible human being that I do in my wife,
Hmm.
and together we were learning about communication, how to communicate with each other, what's relevant, what's not, and it fast tracked a self reflection and awareness drive in me that's brought me to where I am now.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't have been able to do it without my wife and without my therapist. I went through a year's worth of therapy during lockdown that was really important to me. It was an incredible gentleman called Nick Mercer. I'd recommend him to anyone out there.
Hmm.
And now I stand before you today, the most well I've ever been in my life, ever. The
Hmm.
most capable, the most competent, the most confident. And when you were talking about just then how, you're feeling good and what the basis of that is, the basis of my wellness now, it isn't in happiness. It's not in life being perfect, because life's very far from perfect.
Hmm.
Logistically, practically, things are really difficult.
Hmm.
And I'm in the greatest place that I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
And that's based in gratitude and contentment.
Hmm. Yeah.
Every single day I wake up and I have my morning reflection and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the breath in my lungs. I'm grateful for my family, for all that I have. And I feel contented,
Hmm.
and by that I don't mean I'm content with, I'm just settling for something. I'm
Hmm.
contented, Dave, and it's so grateful for what I have in and with my life. And I'm aspirational to
Hmm.
provide more for my family. I
Yeah.
have ambition to give my kids the best that I can possibly give them, knowing that is not how that's not my currency.
Hmm.
I will always give them the best that I can give them. But
Hmm.
whether I give them a Lamborghini or a Lada is irrelevant. It's my time and my application that
Hmm.
my kids require from me.
Hmm.
And I'm intentional about giving it to them.
Hmm.
So that's where I am today. And that underpins everything that I do. And that's what I'm trying to bring into my work. It's mental, especially for. Now, here's the thing, because you're academically minded. Academic research, scientific research, especially the quantitative stuff,
Yeah.
it's all based on the bell curve. And everyone who fits in this 20 to 80 percentile their results are generalizable. All those who sit out here, they're anomalies or outliers, and their results are dismissed. Now, I can understand that because, as general rules, you want approaches to serve the person on the Clapham omnibus. You want as many people to be able to utilize them. However, not everyone lives in the 20 to 80th percentile. And especially when we come to work portfolios, work lives, and then the impact of that on personal lives, it's those people who are in that top 10%, 5%, 1%. Not only are they anomalies in statistics, they're anomalies in life and personal connections. When you are the director, the owner of an organization, you can't share your fears with your workforce. You make sure that they're looked after. In fact, you're probably not even going to share them on a director to director level for a very similar reason to what I was saying about football. You don't want people to think that you're not capable of doing your job.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to share it owner to owner of other businesses because you don't want competitors to have some insight into a marginal gain that they can make on you. So what you do is you lock it up and you suck it up.
Yeah.
You can't go home and share it with your family because they don't know what it's like, balancing all the business stuff. So who have they got? What do we have that applies for the anomalies in life when it comes to personal wellness and support? And that is my personal core project at It's Mental. I'm going to take the academic and scientific understanding and we're going to evolve it for those who are marginalised by their success.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think I've certainly been there, like you say. And in terms of these, the rarities of the people that sit outside and marginalised, if you like. I think when I was there, I was there for like 15 years, is running a business. Okay, and I feel like I wasn't a big enough company to have my own in-house HR person.
Okay.
Eventually, I did. I had a hybrid role. I brought somebody in, and that was like for about 8 years of it. And it was a significant change in terms of I had somebody in the company, but also their responsibility was HR. I started to understand more that I'm part of that. I'm supported by that to a degree, and it's kind of where I suppose my professional coaching kind of business side came in. I started to get a coach that was outside the business, and I've had many ups and downs and everything else, and the beauty of life to this point. What always helped me was just like there's many different words I could use, but acceptance definitely comes into it. Like I'm accepting what I'm seeing, and the best way to accept what I'm seeing is to listen. And I felt like if I just having a person there to just sit and listen, even if 50% of what comes out of my mouth is just me throwing all the books off the and then putting them back on again to try and get an order and make sense of it. That was incredibly important to me. And I think, when I think back to my footballing days and John Harbin and the mindfulness exercises, there was a direct link from there to when I was in business because I thought, well, why doesn't everybody have a coach in business? Like, why do they not have that? And you talk about therapy as well. And I think for me, in its most basic form, having somebody to accept you and what you're going through, whether it's good or bad, just accepting it and saying, right, that's where you're at. I found that incredibly useful just to have a person to just sit and listen. I mean, from your perspective, do you think that you talked about therapy before? Just for people watching, how would you describe therapy to somebody and its usefulness?
To my mind and in my experience, therapy is a safe environment with a qualified professional who can guide you through that exploration of self. If you're going to explore yourself, if you're going to understand who you are and what makes you tick, it means you're going to get dirty. Your knees are going to get dirty. You're going to be wading through a lot of mud. If you're going to do it right, if you're going to do it to the degree that it's going to totally transform your thinking, because you need to go back. The vast majority of our core values, beliefs, and experiences, our formative experiences, were in childhood. and you can't explore them by yourself because the emotional responses that will come, the understanding or lack of understanding that you will have, because it will be inherently laden with bias.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be guided by a professional,
Mm-hmm.
not just any professional. I can't reiterate this enough. You know, you need to approach finding a therapist like you did finding your life partner. Go on some kind of speed dating, date people, have trial sessions, because 80% of the efficacy, no, in fact, no, that's not true. 64% of the efficacy of your therapy treatment is in the therapeutic relationship. So
Right.
if you don't connect with your therapist, you've only got a 30 to 40% chance of success.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the point in that? Find someone who you can connect with, and by that I mean you feel at ease.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you feel safe to converse, and just like you said there, David, you get that sense that you're being heard and acknowledged.
Yeah.
And it took me a lot of different attempts to get the right therapist, and without throwing a spanner in the works, I have had 3 life-changing therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I was at 3 different stages of wellness. And
Yeah.
I needed 3 different people. When I was suicidal and in psych hospital, I needed a very certain type of therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And she was absolutely magnificent. Had her for a year.
Mm.
And when I was in that, right, I'm well now. I'm not trying to, retrospectively fix it. I'm well now. So what do I do now? I needed a different therapist for that space.
Mm.
And then the most recent one, Nick Mercer, he was the therapist who transformed my thinking from, like I said, retrofitting what's gone before to actually applying myself in the future.
Yeah.
And he transformed. So I've had 3 life-changing, incredible therapists, and you might need to do that.
Mm.
You might need to go with one therapist for a while, take a break, and go and find another one. Another key for therapy is if you're in therapy for 2 years, then it's not the right therapy for you.
Mm.
You should be with a therapist, I would say, for a 6-month period, and then take 6 months off to go and live what you've learned. Go and apply what you've learned in those therapy sessions,
Yeah.
and then come back to it, so that you can reflect on those learnings. But there should always be growth in your therapeutic journey.
Yeah. In terms of sorry, in terms of say life changing moments, what you said there is super helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure, and definitely me. I don't think there is it that even bringing up the topic of like what is therapy can be like some people can react differently to it, but I think it's a very common perspective, to be honest. I don't think people quite understand what it is. But in terms of like you've had therapists, you've had challenges in your life, you've had low points, you've had high points. How necessary are the low points, in your opinion, to where you are and who you are today? If you think in terms of like, is that to you, is that an acceptance that that's part of life and that's what makes life beautiful? Because without one you can't have the other. Without life being horrific and horrible, it can't be amazing. Where do you sit on that kind of idea?
I'm going to go back a question. That's a wonderful question. I'm going to go back a question to make one further point, and then I'm going to
Yeah.
come to that. Nearly made me emotional. And I'm free with my emotions, so expect me to cry at some point. Yeah, I totally embrace that. When we're talking about therapy and what is therapy, you raised a really important point about being heard, and being acknowledged. And for someone to hear and acknowledge you, and understand what you're going through all in the same time, at the same breath, it has to be someone who's shared similar experiences. So the dynamic between yourself and your therapist is very much a clinical dynamic. A lot of people might take it as a teacher-student dynamic, etc., etc. There's an imbalance there.
Mm.
When you go home to your partner, or you're talking with kids, or even maybe with friends, there's an imbalance there because
Mm.
you're sharing, and these people are invested in your happiness.
Mm.
So when you're sharing, they might want to offer a direct solution, or they might want to distract you. Oh, don't worry about it. At least it's not this. Oh, it's all going to be okay. Just come and do this.
Mm.
They're actually invested in amending or changing whatever it is. There are times, exactly like you said, Dave, when you just need to be heard, where you don't have to explain why you're thinking what you're thinking. You can just get it out, and you know that person sat there nodding. they're nodding because it's empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that sits without all of the other communication structures.
Yeah.
And that's where I believe peer support fits. It, who's an actual peer for you, David?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about certain friend groups, they don't all fit in that.
Mm-hmm.
Your relationship, that's not a peer, that's a different relationship. Your
Mm-hmm.
therapist, that's not a peer relationship. Who can you talk to who, you know, it, you can just throw 10 paragraphs at them and they can just nod,
Yeah.
and they're not gonna try and fix it. They're not going to offer you a solution. They're just going to hear you, acknowledge you, and
Yeah.
understand. That's a powerful relationship.
Yeah. There was something I've learned in terms of, like, when I've been through situations in the last 5 years even, and it was certainly my brother in particular. And you talk about, there's people that, they try and help you when you're down, when you're low, but and it's good intent, it's positive intent, but they want to fix you, like you say, because they
Yeah.
want to help you. But my brother did something that always sticks in my head, and it's like, going through difficult situations, and it was almost the silence, but being present physically and not
Mhm.
saying anything other than maybe occasionally do you want a brew. Like that for me is it's a form of listening to me. It's a form of acceptance, definitely, but just that what it just in my own thought process, what it gave me was somebody's prepared to sit in this with me, knowing they can't fix it right now, but they're prepared to sit through this horrible situation. And I felt
Yeah.
like that was a brilliant exercise in acceptance and listening without actually, needing to say anything. I wasn't even talking. It was just my body, my movement is me. And I think that you are right in terms of, like, there's quite a lot of people when you're in a low situation that try and fix it. Quite often, people that are close to you, that comes from love, I suppose. But I also, my perspective, and the question I'm putting forward in that whole, spectrum of, like, life and, trauma and horror, and then the opposite side of beauty and, amazing life. Like, my personal view, as I said today, is like, I have I've had deep things go on, but on the opposite side of that, I have the ability to have a more open, accepting, present mind because of
Mm.
that contrast of situation. Um, so to just come back to that view, do you believe that people need to go through difficulty in order to experience life?
You have to experience contrast to understand either end of the scale. You
Yeah.
have to.
Mm.
If milk's 50p at the shop and it's the only shop, milk's 50p.
Mm.
Is it cheap? Is it expensive? We don't know. But
Yeah.
when a new shop opens 2 doors down and milk's 50p, all of a sudden that 50p milk is expensive.
Mm.
And that's what brings the contrast of scale to our mind, our understanding, our experience. So yes, you do need to experience A in order to understand B.
Mm-hmm.
You have to experience A and B to value them both. And in my lived experience, everything that I've been through has brought me to this point, and that I am grateful for.
Mm.
However, I'm not delusional about this.
Mm.
My journey, I hate the word journey, but my past experiences and the pathway that I've walked down, I have made some choices that have hurt other people, that have
Yeah.
impacted other people's lives. And so, in order to come back to the question, if I could have walked the same pathway without other people in and around me having to have experienced the hurt that they did,
Yeah.
then I would take it every day.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't. So it's almost selfish to say everything's brought me to who I am now, because it
Mm.
has, and it's hurt other people. There are other people I know in my life who've been impacted by choices that I've made and haven't recovered the way that I have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can't buy in 100% as a philosophical approach.
Mm-hmm.
That life had to be this way. If it could have gone another way
Mm.
without all of that collateral damage,
Mm.
then that might have been it would have been better for other people.
Yeah.
However, and you'll find that I rarely say the word but, because but puts things in direct conflict with one another. It's when we need to understand that things coexist.
Mm-hmm.
There might be different perspectives, there might be, contrary perspectives, and they coexist. So yes, there's a collateral damage to the pathway that I've walked, and my growth, my intentional growth, through applying myself to wellness and to understanding why I made those decisions and what the impact of those decisions were. That's brought me to where I am now, and yeah, I'm well today.
I mean, I love that on so many different levels of what you said there. I would say the same thing. I think when I've been at the worst point, I've definitely done the same thing. Words, my behaviour at times can affect other people and have. And I think for me, it still comes down to that level of acceptance. That's what happened, and it can't sometimes be fixed. And it's an acceptance of that is what life. That's a part of life. That's a part of what you can do. But it shouldn't. It doesn't stop you from moving forwards with your life. But it is an acceptance that happened. It happened that way. In many cases, it can't be changed. Relationships can't be brought back in. But I do think that's an important share. Thanks for saying that, because it's also a level of vulnerability in a way to say that you've affected other people, and it's an awareness moving forward. In terms of like,
it goes to your point of acknowledgement, David.
yeah.
I can't be delusional in this moment. So I acknowledge the impact of everything that's gone. And it's taken me several years to work through the shame and the embarrassment that has come through acknowledging the impact of where I've been and what I've done. And I get to this point where I echo your sentiment. It is done. I understand, I make amends as and when and where I can. And I and we move on and forward. And one of the hardest learnings for someone who used to be a people pleaser is that not everyone's going to like you. I was desperate for everyone to love me, but I'd settle for like.
Yeah.
And and embarking on this self-awareness pathway and therapeutic pathway, I was filled with fear. Because I was like, what if I find out who I am and I'm a dick and people don't like me?
Yeah.
Now that really chopped me at my core at that point, because that was my biggest value, was to be loved by everyone else. And I did it anyway.
Yeah.
I acknowledged that fear and I did it anyway. And it's almost like a byproduct, an incidental byproduct of applying myself and doing therapy right, means that I get to the point where I understand it doesn't matter what other people think of me.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Or not that it doesn't matter. That's not where I anchor my self-esteem. I'm anchored in me and my faith and my family to a certain extent. And from there, I can go and authentically be me. And if you accept me, wonderful. And if you don't, okay. That's your life. You go and do what you want to do. It's a long-winded way of going round and back to, I can acknowledge the impact of my actions in the past, and I can stride forward.
In terms of like you taking that forward into your day to day, okay? And I don't know, memories come up, or certain locations of people or situations or time of day. Maybe you maybe not triggered, but you're aware again that in the past you've hurt people, or you've had situations you've upset people. How what would you? There'll be many people, like, we're human beings. We act the way we act, right? There'll be many people listening to this and watching this thing that have done the same thing. I have. Okay. What would your advice be to moving into tomorrow and the day after, and you have these thoughts crop up where you're like, it's not in the sense that you want to people please, but certainly the people in the past that you've upset or you've hurt. What strategies, or what can you do moving forward in the day to day to remain in like a good, solid, a healthy state of mind, I suppose, and not let it beat you down too far? Because I'm sure, I don't know about yourself, but I certainly have. I'm 45 years of age. I've certainly had situations that this has happened, and occasionally I could find myself in a situation where I'm like, I wish I hadn't acted like that. I wish I hadn't have said that. But there's nothing I can do. Yes, sure, I'm saying to you right now, I can accept it, but it's still sometimes it's hard. It's difficult. What kind of things do you do to kind of not distract yourself, but just be okay with yourself, be at ease with yourself.
Okay. Um, you kind of mentioned two or three different things that sprang to mind. I'm kind of going through this process with a friend of mine. He's called Stephen Corker. Corks, centre half. He played QPR, Liverpool. He's out in Turkey now.
Mm.
And this almost goes back to what I was saying a couple of questions ago. Corks is my man friend.
Mm.
He's my man friend. He's not my everyday best friend. And he doesn't fit into any of the other aspects of the Venn diagram, of interactions. He's my man friend who I can call him up and I say, Cooks, I just need your ears. Bang, vent this at him. And it works vice versa. And the reason why position is so powerful in our in my life is because in a professional and life Venn diagram, if you made one, our intersects are so ridiculously similar. He's had addiction history, professional footballers making corporate speaking crossover, a child out of wedlock, all of these things, really were very, very similar. Guy mixed heritage, blah, 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 blah. And he's a peer. He's a peer. So we can both share to each other without needing response, without explaining why we are feeling something. So the reason why I mention that is one of the tools that I use on a daily basis is when I feel heightened emotion, I ask myself two questions. Was the emotion that I felt appropriate for what happened? And was the depth of the emotion that I felt, was it proportionate to what happened? Simple example, if I spill a cup of tea and I'm angry or annoyed, I'm like, well, is anger appropriate? Well, and when I say note it, I mean I will physically put it down in notes on my iPhone as part of a to-do list. And then at the end of the day, when I'm having my reflections, I'll have a look at my heightened or spiked emotions through the day, and I will choose who's the appropriate person for me to share that with.
Yeah.
So I've got a council around me. I've got my wife, my mum, my eldest brother, my man friend, my best friend, and my therapist. Now, between those six people, I will always have someone to talk to about something.
Yeah.
For example, my spiked emotion in the day, it might have been about something to do with Carrie, my wife. So she's not going to be the first person that I bring that to. I want some objectivity on my emotions and my thought process before I bring that to her. So I might share that with my mum. I might share that with my brother, etc., etc. So that's my long-winded way of saying when I get when I get triggered, I note it, and I note it. I reflect on it at the end of the day to see whether it was appropriate, whether it's something that warrants attention, and if it does warrant attention, then I'll take it to a member of my council. And I don't hate the word trigger. We've come into a period of time where, because we're so conscious of emotional actions and responses and how detrimental they can be to a person, when our emotions are triggered, society is starting to see that as a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, Dave. Your emotions being triggered, that's your emotional guidance system. If your emotions are triggered, then rather than say, oh no, I'm triggered, run away, that needs to be your catalyst to action. It's spiking up to say, right, something has happened in this situation that warrants your attention. Do you know what it is? And do you know what attention to give to it? So rather than a trigger warning being like a cautionary thing, we need to say, look, you're going to be triggered from this. We're going to talk about stuff. It's going to trigger your emotions, and we need you to know exactly where to go when they're triggered, because then you can resolve what it is that has been brought to your attention.
Yeah, I like that. I think as you're talking there, it's like it's a guidance system. It's a great way of putting it, and it's also, I suppose, a guidance system can also help you in terms of what's the most appropriate environment for this emotion, and who's the most appropriate person for this emotion.
Exactly.
Let's be honest. I've known you for over a year now. I think it is properly, in terms of the occasional call. But I suppose you've heard me out. I've heard you out at times, and there's been emotions and stuff there, and you've definitely listened, which is a great part of Clarke. But I think that I do like that as like a guidance system. I do think that's a really appropriate way to put it.
The reason why the trigger warning has become cautionary is because usually we're talking about sensitive topic,
Yeah.
and the emotions that are triggered will be intense sadness or intense anxiety or stress. And that's cautionary because not everyone knows how to manage those things yet, usually because it's resonated with your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, that means that experience is unresolved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an unresolved experience, and that's why you're getting triggered in what's a negative way. A negative way. There are no negative emotions, by the way. There are just some that as society we've been conditioned not to manage well.
Yeah. In terms of, I'm conscious that you've got a beautiful family to get back to, but I've got I'll just one final question. I'm sure we'll have you back on because there's so much I want to ask you, but we haven't got time. But in terms of emotion, just to focus back to the start, and let's focus on what does Clarke do for fun in particular? I know you love being around your family, probably, and your friends, right? But what do you do? You mentioned computer games. You mentioned what does Clarke do for fun these days? Yeah.
The computer games and stuff like that, they've dropped right off my radar because what I found it was that they're just time stealers.
Mm.
Especially the way that they're developed nowadays. They're so good.
Yeah.
Computer games and socials, they're devised on that fruit machine kind of algorithm where it's grab your attention and keep it.
Mm.
So it's not the money that you're spending that they want, it's your time that they want. They want you in there and engrossed in there. And I don't want to be engrossed in there anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be engrossed in life, especially those who are dear to me. So I would say the greatest times of fun that I have in my week are my intentionally applied time with my family specifically. As I said, our 6-year-old is severely autistic, so the activities that we can do with her have to be really meticulously planned. And doing that and, seeing the joy and the love in her, that gives me joy. Specifically having a date night with my wife and going to Rio Steakhouse and getting in a meat coma. I love that. I love that. And occasionally they're playing a game of golf.
Mm.
So I get that outdoors. I do love being outside. And I had to go through an understanding of golf because I first went into it with that athlete mindset that, yeah, next year I'm going to be on the seniors tour and all that. It's all about my scores. And then I took it to the other aspects. I was like, no, it's all about your physical health. So try and run round carrying your bag as quick as you can. And then I came to that understanding where actually, Clarke, it's just a bit of time to relax.
Yeah.
It's a bit of time to switch your phone off, get in touch with nature. And yeah, you might have a good round, you might have a bad round, you might play with someone and connect with them, you might play on your own. But, it's just a little bit of me time, like you said. And it is fun when I do it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say probably golf
Yeah.
is my fun time.
Yeah. Well, listen, on the topic of time, thank you for your time, because I think as it sounds silly saying, but you've just been Clarke as I know Clarke and how I've known Clarke, right? You've just been yourselves exactly, what we're after here, and we do, your shares have been brilliant. I've learned a lot just listening to you here. But thank you for your time, thank you for your shares. No doubt we'll want to get you back on down the line because you've got so much to offer. But we really, really appreciate it. And have you got one final question that I can take into my next interview.
Well, I've got a suggestion for you, and that could be that next time I interview you, because there's so much more about you that I would like to hear. And these ears might be little, Dave, but they work really well. So let's turn the tables and let's
Yeah.
learn more about you. One question to take into your next interview. You're going to have to edit out this pause.
That's what AI is.
I would say, I'm just thinking variations on a theme, because a really important, have you communicated your needs?
Okay.
The reason for that is like oftentimes we judge people for not meeting our needs when we haven't even articulated them to them.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. You know, especially in relationships, you know, you can get angry with your partner because they haven't done this or they haven't done that for me. Well, have you told them that you need that?
Mm-hmm.
So have you articulated your needs to those around you?
Perfect. Noted. It's in the notebook. Got it. Taking it to the next. Listen, thanks again. Absolute legend. And I'd like to say a friend. Cheers, mate. Cheers, buddy.